I once believed that silence was a form of respect, that if I kept quiet, endured, stayed out of the way, they would love me, but I was wrong. Because sometimes silence just makes you invisible. The day Harold died, the world didn't stop. It didn't pause for my grief. It didn't care that I'd lost the only man who ever truly saw me. The sun still rose, the mail still came, and our children still showed up, not with comfort, but with questions. Did he leave a will? Did he have insurance? Is the house still in his name? Not one asked how I was. I sat at the kitchen table staring at Harold's empty mug and realized I was already alone. He died peacefully in his sleep, at least that's what they said. One breath, then none. No goodbyes, no warning, just gone. 45 years together, and he left quietly just like he lived. But before he died, he told me one thing I never forgot. If I go first, Evelyn, I want you to keep it quiet. Not forever. Just long enough to see who they really are. He was talking about the money. The 8 million he had quietly built from investments, land, and business shares. Money our children didn't know existed. I didn't say a word. At the funeral, I wore black and held Dana's hand. I let Eric do the talking. I let them cry. I let them pretend they were close to their father. But I watched. And I listened. "Do you think there's anything left?" Dana asked her husband in hushed tones. "She probably doesn't even know how to access it," Eric said. They were already dividing the invisible pie, and I was still holding the knife that cut the last piece of cake for Harold. They moved in quickly, not into the house but into my space. Dana began stopping by every morning, bringing coffee, sorting through my pantry, suggesting I donate old things. Eric came with boxes, helping me organize. What they were really doing was preparing to take over. "Mom, you don't need all this space," Dana said one evening. "It's just you now. Just me. As if I hadn't built every corner of this home. As if my presence here was a placeholder, not a foundation." I nodded. I smiled. I endured. Because Harold had told me to wait, and I trusted his instincts more than my own aching heart. So I watched as they sized up the silverware, photographed paintings, mentioned property taxes and utilities and what would make more sense. And I said nothing, because I already knew what they didn't. The deed was in my name. The money was in a trust. The will left everything to me. They assumed I was week-old, tired, alone. And in their eyes, that made me manageable. They forgot who raised them, forgot who held this family together through bankruptcy, illness, and college tuition. But I hadn't forgotten, and I hadn't changed. I had just grown quieter. Then came the proposal. A senior living facility brochure slid across the kitchen counter like it was a gift. "They do meal prep and laundry," Dana said. "There's even a shuttle service. And doctors on site," Eric added. I looked down at the glossy photo of smiling strangers on a fake green lawn, and all I could think was, they want me gone. Not because they were worried about me, but because they wanted what I had without me in the way. But I stayed calm. I thanked them, told them I'd consider it, told them I just needed a little more time. They smiled like they had already won, and I smiled too, because I knew the game hadn't even started. I visited the lawyer again, quietly. We reviewed Harold's trust, the updated will, the allocations to the charities he loved, the endowment fund for the hospital wing, the sealed letter he left for Dana and Eric, one I'd only deliver when the time was right. I made no changes, because Harold had done it all right, and I was simply following his plan. Weeks passed. They grew impatient. Dana dropped hints about selling the house. Eric suggested consolidating assets. One day I caught him in Harold's office rifling through the desk. He didn't even look embarrassed. "Just looking for some tax forms," he said. I said nothing, but I locked the drawers after that. Then it escalated. Dana brought a friend from a real estate agency to Sunday dinner. Eric talked about reverse mortgages. They started talking about me in past tense, as if I were already gone. As if I didn't hear the sentences that began with, "when she moves out," "after we sell the place," "once the estate is cleared." And still I endured. Because I knew they were about to show their worst. And when they did, they would lose everything. They thought I was fragile. They thought I had nothing. They thought they could plan their future around my absence. But they didn't know that silence is sometimes the loudest warning of all. It begins with little things: a door closed too hard, a conversation that stops when you enter the room. Suddenly, you're not family, you're a project. And the more they try to manage you, the more you feel like a burden you never agreed to be. The resentment didn't arrive loudly. It crept in, like fog under the door settling in corners. It was in the way Dana began rolling her eyes when I asked her to stop moving my things. It was in Eric's deep sighs when I asked for help with the TV remote. They were still kind on the surface, but the kindness had conditions. And those conditions were beginning to suffocate me. I started keeping track, just for myself. Every dismissive comment, every backhanded compliment, every time they exchanged a glance behind my back. "Are you sure you remembered to take your pills today, Mom?" "You said that already." "That was yesterday. Remember, I wasn't forgetful. I wasn't confused." But they were trying to plant the seeds, so that when they made their move, no one would question it. The breaking point was Harold's chair. One morning I came downstairs and saw it gone. The leather recliner he sat in every night for 20 years, replaced by some sleek beige ergonomic thing Dana said brightened up the room. "The old one was falling apart, Mom. It was his," I said. "Exactly. It's time to move forward. Forward." She hadn't even glanced back. I went to the garage to find the old chair. It wasn't there. Eric had hauled it off to the dump. "It was just junk, Mom," he said when I confronted him. "Don't get sentimental about everything." Sentimental, that chair held more memories than his entire adult life. But to them it was just an obstacle, another piece of me they could discard. Then came the bills. Dana began offering to help with finances. I politely declined, repeatedly, so she started checking the mailbox before I got to it, reading my statements, highlighting things in red ink. "Do you really need to be spending this much on books? Why are you still donating to charities? You need to think about long-term care. Charities, books." I had spent decades giving to community, to church, to women's shelters, to scholarship funds. But now I was being treated like a child with a spending problem. Eric wasn't better. He came around once a week, always with an agenda. "Let's talk numbers. You should really consider consolidating your accounts. You're exposed, Mom. A target." I wasn't exposed. The money was protected, distributed across trusts, foundations, and a family office Harold built long ago. But I didn't tell Eric that. Let him worry. Let him scramble. Because watching him itch for control, he'd never have. That was the only joy I had left. I started to feel like a stranger in my own home. Dana had labeled my spice jars, reorganized my pantry, thrown out my glassware for safety. "We're just trying to help," she said. "Help me into a corner?" I asked. She frowned. "No help, you adjust. This house is too big for one person." But it was never just about space. It was about ownership, about erasing me without having to say it out loud. The whispers grew louder. One night, I overheard them talking in the living room. They didn't know I was still awake. "She's never going to move on her own," Dana said. "She's stubborn." "We could start the paperwork," Eric replied. "We have the mental health clause. It's enough to raise flags. You think she'll fight it? What can she do? It's 2 against 1. I clutched the banister as my heart thundered in my chest. Mental health clause. They were plotting to have me declared incompetent. The betrayal wasn't sudden. It was a slow drip. And now the glass was full. They weren't waiting for me to die. They were trying to push me off the edge and call it compassion. I called my lawyer the next day, not to change the trust, not yet, just to talk. He said gently, "You're not the first mother this has happened to, Evelyn, but I might be the only one who sees it coming." "And what will you do?" I smiled. "I'll wait. I'll let them dig their hole. And then I'll let them fall in." They brought in a social worker, claimed it was just routine. Dana smiled sweetly, said it was just a check-in. The woman asked about my memory, my medications, my mood. I answered clearly, calmly, precisely. "Do you feel safe here?" she asked. I paused. Then I smiled. "Oh, absolutely. I'm safer than they think." The woman blinked. Dana looked confused. I just sipped my tea and watched them fidget, because now I wasn't just a pawn, I was a queen playing defense, and they had no idea how close they were to checkmate. They thought I was fading. They thought they could break me down piece by piece. But what they didn't realize was, every time they crossed a line, every time they rolled their eyes, every time they muttered behind closed doors, they were giving me something priceless proof that I was right to keep the truth from them, and soon that truth would be their undoing. Bitterness doesn't bloom overnight. It grows like mold in dark corners, feeding on betrayal, on silence, on the awful realization that those you love may never have truly loved you back. It happened on a rainy Thursday. They told me to pack a bag. Just for a few nights, Dana said. It's only temporary, Eric added. They said the house needed maintenance. Plumbing repairs, electrical upgrades, things I hadn't requested, and things they couldn't explain clearly. We're doing it for your safety. Dana smiled, but she didn't meet my eyes when she said it. They were kicking me out of my own home. They took me to a small apartment, fully furnished, neat, sterile. It smelled like fresh paint and lemon-scented cleaner. It's cozy, Eric said. We'll check in every day, Dana added. They dropped my bag at the door, like I was a guest overstaying her welcome. I stood there, coat still on, while the door clicked shut behind them. No key in my hand, no copies of documents, just me and a clock on the wall ticking like a countdown. I didn't cry, not then. Not when I opened the cabinets and found them filled with bland, tasteless food. Not when I discovered the TV only had local channels. Not even when I realized my phone had been swapped for a simplified version with half my contacts deleted. But that night, when I reached for my wedding album and realized they hadn't packed it, that's when the tears came. I became a prisoner with a welcome mat. Every visit was rehearsed. Dana arrived with groceries and shallow smiles. Eric came with financial updates I didn't ask for. They always stood, never sat, always checked their watches, never asked how I felt, only what I needed. I stopped answering. I stopped speaking altogether for a few days. And they didn't even notice. Then came the card. It arrived in a plain envelope tucked under the door, a retirement home brochure. We've booked a tour for you, Dana wrote in neat handwriting. It's time to think long-term. I stared at the photo of the building on the front. Clean, clinical, cold, and in that moment it hit me. They didn't just want me out of the house. They wanted me out of the way. For good. The bitterness took root deep inside me. It curled around my ribs, settled in the pit of my stomach, laced every memory with doubt. Had they ever loved me, or had I just been the road they walked on? The roof they lived under, the bank they never had to thank. I remembered Harold's voice. They'll show you who they are, Evelyn, and when they do, don't try to save them. Just let them fall. I never thought I'd see it this clearly. Our children, our legacy, crushing me to get to what they thought was theirs. I started writing everything down. Every conversation, every manipulation, every lie. I wrote not to fight them, but to remember. Because when people lie long enough, they want you to forget the truth. But I wouldn't. Not anymore. Then came the final insult. A notice on the door. This unit is now managed by Oakwood Senior Transition Services. I called the number. They said my children had signed a 6-month contract prepaid. They had leased my future without even asking. I sat on the edge of the unfamiliar bed, hands trembling. And for the first time in my life, I whispered words I had never dared say aloud. They don't deserve me. Not my home, not my name, not my silence. I stopped playing along. When Dana brought groceries, I handed them back. When Eric tried to talk finances, I stared out the window. When they offered updates, I smiled without answering. They didn't notice the change, because they never really saw me at all, but I saw them, clearly, without the blur of motherly love or hopeful delusion. And what I saw were two strangers who would sell their own roots if the price was right. Then I made a call, to the lawyer, to the bank, to the charity board Harold had served on. One by one, I started reactivating the pieces they didn't know existed. They thought they buried me with their control, but they forgot I had already outlived one kind of death, and I wasn't afraid to rise from another. Bitterness doesn't make you cruel. It makes you wise, wiser than the lies, wiser than the fake affection, wiser than the children you once would have died for. I sat in that rented apartment surrounded by silence and made a decision. They threw me out like trash. But what they forgot is, sometimes the things you throw away come back sharper than ever. I stopped talking. Not because I had nothing to say, but because I had finally learned that silence reveals everything. Let them believe I was weak. Let them believe I was finished. I just watched and waited. 3 weeks passed in that apartment. Not a word from Dana. Just a few short texts about pending facility tours. Eric had vanished entirely. And for the first time in years, I had space to think. I made tea. I read books they'd called a waste of time. I walked outside without telling anyone where I was going. And in those quiet hours, I began to stitch something together. Not revenge, a reckoning. I reviewed the trust documents. Harold had left everything in order. $8 million, portioned across multiple accounts, tied to specific instructions. Only Evelyn can access this, and only Evelyn decides what comes next. I had abided by his wish stay silent, but I wasn't obligated to stay erased. From the apartment's small kitchen, I began to plan. I made lists, not of punishments, not of retributions, but of truths. What they'd done, what they'd taken, what they'd become. I wrote them down not for the court, not even for the lawyer, but for me, to remind myself that I hadn't imagined it, that the cruelty was real, that the erasure was intentional. I began attending community meetings again, quietly. Local events, church groups, library readings, people noticed. "It's good to see you back, Evelyn. How have you been holding up? Didn't Dana say you'd moved out of state?" Moved out of state? The lies had traveled far, but I didn't correct them. I just smiled and watched. I walked past my house one afternoon. The lawn was over-trimmed, the shutters painted a color I would never choose. And Harold's rose bushes gone, replaced with gravel and sterile landscaping. I stood across the street, hands trembling. They had gutted more than my home. They had gutted my memory. A neighbor crossed over. Mrs. Lynn. Sweet woman. Quiet. "Evelyn. I thought you were in assisted care. That's what they said, isn't it? They told the HOA you were declining, that you signed over the house." I didn't respond, but that night I wrote another line in my journal. They didn't just steal my home. They stole my identity. Then came the bills. Forwarded finally to the apartment. Mortgage documents, loan applications. Dana and Eric had taken out 2 lines of credit against the house in my name. They forged my signature, claimed I was too ill to manage paperwork. Filed legal guardianship documents still pending. It wasn't just manipulation now. It was fraud. And the only reason they hadn't succeeded was simple. They didn't know about Harold's safekeep account. The real one. The one protected by biometric access. The one that would trigger a legal review the moment someone else tried to use it. I called my lawyer again. "Are you ready?" he asked. "No," I said. "I'm more than ready." The trap had already closed. They just hadn't felt the snap yet. I had recorded our phone calls. The visit from the social worker. The signed lease I never agreed to. And I had the biggest weapon of all, the letter Harold wrote for them. "If you are reading this, it means you betrayed your mother. You chose greed over loyalty. And what you receive from this moment forward is exactly what you deserve." I drafted my own letter. Not angry, not dramatic, just honest. It started like this: "Dear Dana and Eric, you forgot who I was. You forgot what I've endured, what I've built, what I've given. You forgot that I was never weak. And so you tried to erase me. But here's what you didn't know: I've been watching. And now, everyone else will too." I mailed it on a Monday, and by Friday everything started to unravel. First came the credit flag. Their forged documents triggered a fraud alert. The bank called, the accounts froze, investigations launched. My lawyer submitted evidence. The law was moving slow, steady, but inevitable. Then came the fallout. Dana's real estate firm let her go pending investigation. Eric's business partner pulled out of a major deal. And still they didn't call me. Not a single message, not one apology, not even an excuse. But I didn't need one, because by then the quiet had taught me something powerful. Some people don't come back when they fall, and you shouldn't try to catch them. I returned home, legally, officially, publicly. Neighbors waved. Some looked surprised. A few even cried. I stepped through my front door, dropped my keys on the kitchen counter. And for the first time in nearly a year, I exhaled. They threw me out like trash. and I watched silently as they buried themselves in their own lies. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't chase them. I didn't need to. Because while they clawed at the illusion of wealth and control, I held the one thing they never understood: the truth. And when you hold the truth long enough, it becomes a weapon, and a shield, and eventually, a crown. Sometimes silence is grace, but other times, silence is a warning shot. And when the truth finally speaks, it doesn't whisper, it roars. The letter hit them like thunder. I didn't see their faces when they opened it, but I imagined the disbelief, the panic, the way Dana would shake the paper as if the words might rearrange themselves, the way Eric would curse pacing the room. Because in that moment they knew I was not gone, I was not powerless, and I was not finished. They showed up at my door. Together for the first time in months, no flowers, no fake smiles, just fear plain and ugly. "Mom, can we come in?" I stepped aside. Let them see the house they tried to strip bare. Let them see that I was home, not in a facility, not in hiding, but in full control. They sat quiet for once, and I began. "You signed my name on a loan. You told people I was mentally unfit. You moved me out like a broken chair." Eric opened his mouth to speak. "Don't. Just listen." They did. Because for the first time they could feel it. The power had shifted. I reached into the drawer and pulled out Harold's final letter. Unopened. Sealed. "Your father wanted you to read this if you ever crossed the line. I guess you have." I slid it across the table. They stared at it like it might explode. Then Eric picked it up, hands shaking, and read aloud. "Dana, Eric. If you are reading this, it means you've forgotten everything we taught you. You saw your mother's grief and turned it into a business opportunity. You saw her silence and thought it was ignorance. But Evelyn has more strength in her pinky finger than either of you have shown in years. The money. It was never meant to be a reward. It was a responsibility. One you've proven you cannot handle. So this is where your journey ends. You will receive nothing. Not because we didn't love you, but because love does not mean enabling betrayal." Dana sobbed. Eric stood in stunned silence. I stood calmly. I kept quiet because I wanted to see who you really were. "Mom, please," Dana tried to speak. "No, you don't get to plead, not after turning my life into a transaction. We didn't mean to lie, didn't mean to forge, didn't mean to bury me with your ambition." Eric sat down again, defeated. "We thought you'd moved on." "No," I said. "You wanted me to, because I was in the way." I handed them documents. Official, stamped, final. Here are the trust records. Every cent Harold left, every donation I made, every name on the disbursement list. Not one of them is yours. "What about the house?" Dana whispered. "Already protected. You can't touch it. You can't list it. You can't even step inside again without permission." Their eyes went wide, because in that moment they realized they had gambled everything and lost. I wasn't done. "But here's the worst part," I said. "It wasn't about the money, it was about trust. And you buried it. The moment you pushed me out, you made your choice." Eric put his face in his hands. Dana cried harder. But I had no more sympathy left, because you can forgive mistakes. But malice, that's earned. They begged. Dana promised to do better. Eric said he didn't know what got into him. But the thing about betrayal is, it can't be undone. I walked them to the door, and with one final glance I said, "This house is no longer your inheritance. It's your lesson." And I closed the door. Word spread quickly. People talk, even when you don't. Soon the community knew the truth, about the loans, the eviction, the lies. Suddenly Dana's friends grew quiet. Eric's business partners grew distant. They weren't being punished. They were simply seen. Seen clearly. Without spin, without narrative, without control. I was invited to speak at a women's group. Topic: protecting your dignity as you age. I told them the truth. About inheritance. About silence. About not letting grief make you small. And when I finished, the applause wasn't loud. It was long, because they knew. They'd lived it too. Truth is not about revenge, it's about release, letting go of the weight of pretending, letting go of the fear of being seen as bitter, letting go of people who only held on to you for what they could take. They threw me out like trash, but now they're the ones left outside. And I'm finally home. Peace doesn't always come with smiles. Sometimes it arrives quietly, with a heavy sigh, a clear sky, and the understanding that even after everything, you're still standing. The days after the truth were strangely quiet. No more knocks on the door. No more check-ins masked as control. No more carefully spoken lies. Just stillness. And within that stillness, relief. I kept the house exactly how I wanted. I replaced the gravel with Harold's rose bushes, restored the old leather chair Dana once threw away, found a similar one at a vintage shop, and sat in it like it was a throne. Each change was small, but together they made the house feel like mine again. Not a place I was surviving in, a place I was living in. I saw Dana once more. Weeks later, she stood at my gate, hair undone, eyes red. She didn't ask to come in. She just stood there holding a crumpled envelope. I didn't open the gate, but I took the letter. She nodded as if that was all she could hope for. Then she turned and walked away. The letter read, "I didn't realize how far we'd fallen. I see now what I refused to see then. You were never a burden. You were the only person holding us together. I'm sorry, I know it's too late to repair everything, but I hope someday you'll forgive me for forgetting who you are." I folded the letter, placed it in the box of letters Harold once wrote me, not because it healed everything, but because it was a start. Eric never wrote. He moved out of state. Last I heard, he started working at a nonprofit. Maybe he changed. Maybe not. But I no longer wake up wondering if he thinks of me, because I stopped making space for people who only took. I filled my days with purpose, volunteering, reading, planting new flowers, hosting quiet dinners with people who didn't ask about my finances. They asked about me, what I liked, what I thought, what I remembered, and slowly I began to bloom again. Not just as a mother, not just as a widow, but as a whole woman. I watched the seasons change. Spring brought lavender and fresh tomatoes. Summer brought birdsong and iced tea. Fall arrived with golden leaves and long walks to the library. And winter brought silence again. But this time it wasn't lonely. It was earned, like a reward after surviving the fire. Harold's picture sits on my desk. I look at it every morning. They know now, I say. You were right. And I imagine him smiling back, not in triumph, but in peace. Some people ask me, do you regret it? Keeping the inheritance quiet? Letting them think I had nothing? Watching it all burn down? My answer, no. Because if I'd told them from the start, they would have just taken faster. Now I live on my own terms. The money is still there, mostly gone to good things. Scholarships, hospitals, food banks. One small trust for Dana's youngest child who once made me a birthday card out of crayons and love. But nothing else. And I feel no guilt. Because I finally know the difference between family by blood and family by heart. I sit on the porch most mornings, cup of tea in hand, birds chirping, my name no longer whispered in pity or judgment, but in respect. Not because I was wealthy, not because I won, but because I survived with grace. And in the end, that was worth more than 8 million ever could be. They threw me out like trash, but now they're the ones lost, grasping for pieces of something they were never ready to inherit. Me, I'm whole again, not because I stayed angry, but because I found peace in the truth. And every morning with the rising sun and a warm mug in hand, I remind myself I am not what they said I was. I am what I chose to become. What time is it where you are watching this final part, and where share with us in the comments. Let's pause in this moment together, and if you've ever been written off, pushed aside, or treated like a burden in your own family, tell your story below. Your silence may just be the beginning of your power.